OK, we might as well. Yes, OK. Order. Helen Maguire to move the motion.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I beg to move that this House has considered the matter of potential merits of mandatory medical markers for firearm licence holders. It's a pleasure to speak under your chairship, Ms McVeigh, and have the opportunity to raise such a critical issue. In 2021, 3-year-old Sophie Martin was one of 6 people in Plymouth who lost their lives in a mass killing. At the inquest, it emerged that the murderer's GP had not placed a marker on the medical notes when requested to do so by the police. The murderer had already had his gun taken away previously, and concerns about his health had been reported by his mother, who was the first person killed. When it mattered most, the system failed. This cannot be allowed to happen again. Almost a year after the anniversary of these horrific killings, the previous government rolled out medical markers for new firearm licence holders. Medical markers, once applied to a patient's record, flag that an individual has a firearms licence and automatically alerts doctors if there's been a relevant change in their medical situation. This could include a change in their mental health or evidence of substance abuse. This allows the GP to have a conversation with the patient and, if necessary, inform the police. But here's the catch. These markers are not mandatory. There is currently no obligation on GPs to use this marker. Their use is left to the best endeavours of GPs. I've written to the Minister of State for Crime Policing and Fire to ask for the number of GPs who've downloaded the marker. However, I'm yet to receive a response. This is a missed opportunity to save lives, a missed opportunity to safeguard vulnerable adults with access to firearms and protect public safety. A survey carried out by the Association of Police and Crime Commissioners found that 87% of existing certificate holders believe GPs should inform the police if they become aware of a change of health which could impact a certificate holder's ability to safely own a gun. So why is the government dragging its feet? In 2016, Christopher Foster shot his wife and teenage daughter. He then shot the family animals and burned his house down, dying of smoke inhalation. He had previously seen his GP on several occasions to discuss his depression and suicidal thoughts. Markers on medical notes for firearm owners were not then available, and there was no way that his GP could have known that he had licensed firearms. With medical markers still being optional, if this horrific attack was carried out today, there is still no guarantee that a medical marker would be on his GP record. Our country is home to proud rural communities and individuals who rely on gun ownership for their work, and the shooting industry makes up a vital part of the rural economy. So let me... Absolutely, I'll give way.
Madam Chair, first of all, I commend the Honourable Lady for bringing this forward, and always trying to be helpful, Madam Chair, in relation to my contributions, as others do as well, but I'm not unique to that. In their meetings with key stakeholders, the BASC in Northern Ireland met the Department of Justice. They also met the PSNI, and they routinely acknowledged that the Northern Ireland firearms licensing system is one, if not the most robust systems in the world, and that includes medical checks. It is clear that there is no need for change there, but does the member not agree? It is essential to liaise with shooting organisations like BASC, like Countryside Alliance, for example, to get insight from their expertise and what can be done in relation to the Minister looking at the potential for what we do in Northern Ireland for that system to be the one, and maybe the catalyst, that the Honourable Lady is seeking to achieve.
I thank the Honourable Member for his intervention, and it's really interesting to hear that there's another system in Northern Ireland, and indeed I would urge the Minister to actually look at that and see if that's something that could be applicable here. So let me be clear, this debate is... Yes, I'll give way.
Very grateful for giving way. And I should perhaps clarify for the House that I lead the Shooting and Conservation, or APPG, who also congratulate the Honourable Lady for getting this debate. Would she agree with me that one of the critical reasons that this is not yet compulsory, and I agree entirely with her, it ought to be compulsory, is that some doctors don't want to do it because they think they're going to be in a decision-making position as to whether this person should have a shotgun or firearm certificate. In fact, that is not the case. The decision-maker is the relevant constabulary, and in particular in law, the chief of that constabulary, who ultimately is responsible for making the decision.
Yeah. I thank the Honourable Member for his intervention. I absolutely agree with that. And indeed, what this is about is safeguarding the public and people. And there are many other examples we have with doctors where they have similar abilities to use that information.
Could I just intervene again? She's actually prompted the second point I want to make. I'm grateful, Madam Chair. Doctors and other medics are perfectly happy to do medical checks on people who are going to have driving licences or not. That's an issue of public safety. What is the inconsistency in not doing it for firearms?
I thank the Honourable Member again for his intervention, and I absolutely agree, and I'll be coming on to this further in my speech. So let me just be clear that this debate is in no way about firearm ownership. The government is consulting on this separately, and that is its own debate. Today's discussion is on how we can ensure the medical professionals have the information required to best support the individuals they serve. So Gemma and her daughter, Letty Patterson, who lived in my constituency, were shot and killed by Gemma's husband almost 3 years ago, before he turned the gun on himself. Before his latest shotgun licence renewal, George Patterson had used an online doctor to receive a significant amount of propranolol between 2019 and 2021. However, despite his change in mental health, the online doctor was unaware in his firearms licence, and this medication was not disclosed to his GP, meaning neither professional was able to intervene. If they had, maybe Emma would still be working at Epsom College, and Letty might have celebrated her 10th birthday this year. Robert Needham killed his partner, Kelly Fitzgibbons, and their children, Ava, aged 4, and Lexi, aged 2, in West Sussex in 2020. In Needham's case, as a result of changes to gun licence guidelines, a flag was initially input and then removed. A statement from Kelly's family following the inquest into their deaths described the monitoring and sharing of information between police and medical professionals regarding his shotgun licence as a shambles. Having corresponded with medical organisations, I recognise that balancing the need for patient-doctor confidentiality is paramount. In the first instance, the GP should always ask the individual's consent before contacting another authority, such as the police, about how the issues they are facing may impact their ability to safely possess a gun. However, doctors can break confidentiality when it is in the public interest. According to the British Medical Association, public interest is likely to be justified when it is essential to protect other people from risks of serious harm or death. GPs also must already abide by several safeguarding protocols and laws. The Care Act 2014 sets out 6 key principles of safeguarding, including prevention, noting that it is sometimes possible to act before harm has come to an individual. With these existing guidelines, mandatory markers are not reinventing the wheel. They are simply a way of flagging vital information that is key to the patient and the public safety. The Royal College of GPs considers it valuable to have these digital markers in place and notes that software systems should develop, implement and secure the functionality of the markers in patient records. The College recommends the government work with the providers of GP systems to resolve this issue. The BMA also supports these markers. They told me, doctors have a professional responsibility to share information that might impact on the safety of someone holding firearms in the community, and we need effective systems to do so. The Domestic Abuse Commissioner's Office welcomed the digital medical marker, and recognised the work of bereaved families who've lobbied tirelessly to ensure action is taken to prevent future harm and further loss of life. The British Association of Shooting Conservation and the Countryside Alliance, who have a combined membership of over 200,000 people, both support the introduction of mandatory medical markers. June 2010, March 2020, August 2021, February 2023. These dates are etched in the memories of families torn apart by gun violence. Each one a failure of the system, each one a life that could have been saved. This government has a choice. It can listen to the families of victims, to medical professionals, to gun owners, and to the organisations working to end violence, or it can continue to leave the door open for tragedy. The Liberal Democrats believe mandatory medical markers are a proportionate, evidence-based safeguard. They allow concerns to be flagged early if someone's health changes, rather than waiting years until a licence renewal, which can save lives. So I ask the Minister today, will you finally release the data on how many GPs are using these markers, and will you commit today to making them mandatory? Thank you.
In this debate. The question is that this House has considered the potential merits of mandatory medical markers for firearm licence holders. Sir Geoffrey Clifton-Brown.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's a great pleasure to speak under your chairmanship, and I also, again, reiterate my congratulations to the Honourable Member for getting this important debate. I have campaigned for medical markers for at least 10 years, long before the technology, which now exists, to do them digitally, which of course makes the whole thing far easier than it would have done if they'd had to put them on manually. In those early days, a few put them on manually, but now with digital technology, there is really no reason why the government couldn't have an agreement with the BMA that all GPs and some other health professionals should put them on digitally. And just to add to what the Honourable Member said in her excellent speech, I am chair of the all-party group on shooting and conservation. Just to be absolutely clear where I'm coming from, I also am a shotgun and firearm certificate holder for over 50 years. I've been campaigning with the BSE on the issue of medical markers for many years and have written articles and delivered speeches on this subject, so it's not a new one for me. I fully support a really strict licensing system that works effectively for everyone. The police, firearms and shotgun certificate holders, and most importantly, the wider public, our constituency, because it's in no one's interest that we should have any of these tragic incidents that the Honourable Lady has so powerfully alluded to. If we had a proper firearm certificate system with the medical markers on, clearly, as the Honourable Lady has demonstrated, some of these tragedies could possibly have been avoided, and I would wholly support her in that. This terrible incident at Epsom College, as to why she's called this debate, highlights exactly why we need this robust system of medical markers. And just to explain a little bit more, Madam Chairman, how it works, the current two-stage system does make this possible, and it doesn't add any financial burdens to the GP, because all the burden the GP does is when a patient comes in for a consultation with the GP, the medical marker automatically flags up on his or her screen. Mr. X, Mrs. X has a firearm, has a shotgun certificate. Now, what is it that they have come to see me about? And if it's a range of medical conditions, such as, for example, a propensity to wanting to commit suicide, manic depression, domestic violence, and a number of other of these sorts of medical conditions, it would automatically flag up in the GP's mind as to whether this person was a suitable person at that time to be holding either a firearm or a shotgun certificate. And then, having flagged it up in his mind, as the Honourable Lady has said, he would have a conversation with that. He or she, I use the pronouns both for a GP, would have a conversation with that person saying, I see you're a shotgun certificate holder. You tell me that you're feeling terrible and that you sometimes have feelings of wanting to commit suicide. Do you think at this particular time, and we're going to do our best to provide treatment for you, and it may be that in the future you could return to a normal position where you could hold a shotgun, but at this particular time, do you think you are a fit person to be holding that shotgun certificate? Now, one of two things then happens. Either if the patient is a belligerent sort of patient, he or she would say, well, of course I'm a fit person. The GP would then be in a position of saying, well, I'm very sorry, but I don't consider that you are, and I'm going to have to report your medical condition to the police. The more sensible conversation from a more rational person would be the other side of the coin. Doctor, I hear what you say. I think it is a concern. I will now take steps to either transfer these guns that I hold in my gun cabinet to a person who's got a certificate, or to a firearms dealer, or to the police, until such time as you and the local constabulary think it is fit for me to repossess those weapons. And that, Madam Speaker, and to the Minister, I would say is how it ought to work and would have saved a lot of these tragedies. I think that the government has a role here, as the Honourable Lady made clear. The lacuna in the system is that not all GPs currently operate a medical marker, and the Honourable Lady was quite right to put down a question. It would be really interesting to hear from the Minister this afternoon what percentage of GPs do actually operate a medical marker. And if he doesn't know, and the DHSC doesn't know, then I think they should take steps to send out an inquiry to all GPs to find out. And then I think he could begin to start to have a negotiation with the BMC and the GMA as to why and whether these doctors in their next contract that the government signs with them shouldn't operate this service. Because there are two reasons principally why doctors won't operate the medical marker, because it's actually very easy to do and it actually involves very little work. One is, as I said in my intervention to the Honourable Lady, is that they are concerned, and I think this is a widely held concern about people who won't put the medical marker on, that they are going to be regarded as the decision maker, and they don't want to be the decision maker because at the margin it will be quite difficult to decide whether that person should possess a shotgun or firearm or not. But that is not the case, as I made very clear in my intervention. It is the chief constable of a particular constabulary who granted that certificate that actually is the final decision maker. And indeed, of course, the normal appeal rights apply to the chief constable if he's made a decision that somebody's firearm should not be granted or that it should be revoked. Then the person who's affected has the right to appeal against that decision. So it's quite clear that the GP is the decision maker. And in that instance, I can't see any reason why the GPs would want to operate it. Can I just make the second point? The second reason why GPs don't want to operate it. Of course, they're very busy people, they're overworked, so it is another thing they've got to do. But if they're going to do it for firearms license, for driving licenses, HGV licenses, there are a number of other categories. I can't see why they wouldn't do it in the public interest for firearms. The second situation, and here I declare that my sister was a GP. She was senior partner of a GP practice. One of her partners was a conscientious objector to people having guns. And she ended up by having to do all his casework to do with firearms. Now, again, I think even if a GP is a conscientious objector, they still ought to be interested in the public safety as an overall priority for their work. And I think, again, it would be reasonable to require them to actually just look at these mental notes and take account of whether that person's medical condition was suitable to hold a firearm. I happily give way to my honourable friend.
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for actually the really important points he's making, and he will know that in my capacity as the chairman of the British Shooting Sports Council that brings together 15 leading organisations within shooting sports, and also as a keen and enthusiastic shooter myself, I wholeheartedly agree with him, and I have yet to find anybody who disagrees with the points that are being made. But my honourable friend did make a point about the kind of the wider licensing regime, and part of this does speak to the licensing regime of firearms. And one of the interesting carryovers from this, I also have a pilot's licence, and there are issues with regarding the pilot's licensing, particularly commercial pilot's licensing regime, where medical fitness to fly, including mental health, is part of that ability to fly. So there are examples out there of how this can be done if you get the licensing regime right and the buy-in of the GPs.
I'm extremely grateful to my honourable friend for that intervention. I was coming on to the wider firearms licensing regime. BASC thinks there are about 500,000 shotgun certificate holders and about 150,000 firearm certificate holders. So this is a large job for all the 43 forces to undertake, and it's a costly job. And there have recently been increases in the fees for these firearms and shotgun licenses, renewals and grants of 250%. So actually now they are, I understand, and I'm chairman of the Public Accounts Committee, I understand that the system is largely self-financing at the moment, and I would make one plea to the Minister. This big increase, 250%, came as a great shock, particularly to some of firearm and shotgun holders of modest means. That when the PAC did their hearing on recovering of fees and charges, that it's much better to gradually update them each year rather than leave them, as this has happened in this time, I think, for 12 years with no update, and that's why we've had to have this very large increase. So an update every year, I think, would be appreciated. In this very large, and it's a large task to license 650-odd holders of firearms and shotguns, there is an opportunity here, I think, with the announcement of the white paper this week on we're going to reform our police forces. And I think this is something that one would need to think carefully about. But I think there is a case for considering more centralisation of shotgun and firearm certificates. And with this centralisation of the police, that would be an opportunity to consider that. And I think it would relieve the local police, who often struggle to have... Yeah, can I just make this point? And I happily give way to my fellow member of the Public Accounts. The local police often struggle to have well-trained people in their firearms department. It is quite an onerous task. You've got to know a lot about guns to be able to work out whether this is the gun on the certificate or whether it isn't. And a number of other questions. And so I think actually centralising the processing part of firearms and shotgun licences could make a lot of sense. There would still need to be a local inspection regime. I've recently had the local firearms officer, because I've just renewed my certificates. She came round, she talked to me at some length, I think, to make sure that I was a sane person with no obvious mental problems. But equally, she looked at the guns and jolly well thoroughly checked that the guns that I said I had on my certificate were the guns that were in my cabinet. She looked at the cabinet, she looked at the amount of ammunition I'd got, she questioned me on how much I'd used, she questioned me where I'd used it. This was in the case of firearms regime, which is a different subject. We want to move, well, the government's consulting on moving the regime from for shotguns to firearms, which I think there are a considerable number of problems with and needs to be very carefully considered. I happily give way to my fellow member of the Public Accounts Committee.
Thank you, darling Chairman of the Public Accounts Committee. As the Vice Chair of the CLA Rural Powerhouse, APPG, I fully support the idea of having a centralised licensing system. And it's interesting that the Chair of the CLA Rural Powerhouse Committee is also a Liberal Democrat MP like myself. So I'm pretty confident that it's such a sensible and practical idea and would prevent the awful sort of deaths that we had in Plymouth a few years ago. It is a very good idea, and you obviously agree with me, but thank you for raising it.
Well, I'm very grateful to the support I've got from my fellow committee members, and she's dead right. Of course, it is a sensible idea, and it is one that the Minister and the Government should seriously consider. The final thing I would say is that in this complex process with a very large number of shotgun and firearm certificates, it could be considerably, and the best forces do this already, made more efficient by proper IT. The problem is the best forces have the IT and they do it really efficiently. And this is what's in the whole discussion of fee increases. We wanted to make sure the fee increases were based on the best performance, not the worst. The worst really aren't geared up properly with this IT. Now, in the recent PAC hearing, as my honourable friend knows, we've just done a hearing on police productivity, which is out shortly. We found that a lot of forces, particularly the smaller forces, couldn't afford to upgrade their IT properly. And I think this is a really serious issue because, as we've been finding on the Public Accounts Committee, if you don't have properly upgraded IT, not only does it make processes like shotgun certificate licensing more expensive because it's more inefficient, you've got to do it manually, but it also makes that police force more liable for cyber attacks. It can't then operate the proper big learning systems, AI and so on, if you haven't got proper systems to operate it on. So all in all, I think that this is a really sensible proposal. We know that the number of homicides by licensed shotguns and firearms is very low in this country. Nevertheless, every death, every wounded person is one too many. It's a tragedy for that person. It's a tragedy for their family. And I do think it is incumbent on the government to really take this proposal seriously. And I, again, congratulate the Honourable Lady for bringing it before the House.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's a pleasure to speak under your chairmanship. And I'd like to thank my honourable friend for Epsom Newell for securing this debate. We've all watched with great sadness the recent shootings in the United States, scenes that should have shaken any civilised society. And thankfully, Britain is not a trigger-happy country, nor do we aspire to be. Let me be absolutely clear. This is not about restricting lawful firearm ownership. As a Liberal, I am not in the business of banning things for the sake of it. And as a rural MP, someone who spent almost all my life in the West Country, I am a creature of the countryside, and I know that guns are part of rural life. But they are tools, not toys. Balancing responsible gun ownership with public safety is, of course, a delicate dance. Gun owners already undergo rigorous checks, and we should avoid excessive bureaucracy. But the system is inconsistent, and it does leave gaps. Mandatory medical markers would close those gaps. Shooting organisations themselves recognise this. The British Association for Shooting and Conservation, among others, support the use of medical markers because it reinforces what they know from experience, that licensed gun owners are overwhelmingly responsible and pose no risk to the public. This is precisely why their call for compulsory markers reflects a desire for a system that is robust, consistent and trusted by all. And we must also consider the wider context. Mental health is a growing concern in rural communities like mine. Farmers are among the most resilient people in the country, but resilience does not make anyone immune to pressure. Rural life can be hard and it can be isolating. It involves long hours and financial uncertainty. This is not to pathologise farmers, quite the opposite, but acknowledging the pressures they face is important. The introduction of mandatory medical markers is, quite simply, a win-win for gun owners, for the public and for the medical professionals who play such a vital role in the licensing process. It strengthens trust, enhances safety and reinforces the responsible culture that already exists within our shooting communities. Of course.
I'm really grateful for her giving way. I missed out in my speech a really important point, and it's this. At the moment, there is no check between renewing or granting of a shotgun or firearms licence and the re-grant 5 years later. Under this system, if somebody actually turns up to their GP with one of the conditions that health conditions that would be prejudicial to holding a gun, so there is, in a sense, by introducing this, a check in between grant and renewal. Would she agree?
I thank my honourable friend for his intelligent and incisive comment. Mandatory medical markers help create that support, the support of the rural community. They ensure that if someone is struggling, the licensing process is equipped to respond swiftly and sensitively. The public understands that. 70% of existing firearms licence holders support mandatory markers. Among the wider public, support shoots, pardon the pun, to 86%. And crucially, these markers are not a barrier to gun ownership. They do not make the process more difficult. They simply make it safer. I would say to the Minister, it is common sense.
I'll now come to the front bench. Edward Morello.
And it's a pleasure to serve under your chairship. I'd like to start by congratulating my honourable friend, the member for Epsom and Ewell, for securing this important debate, for her hard work on this topic and for her very moving speech. This debate is not about lives that should not have been lost. This debate is about lives that should not have been lost and about a system that failed when it could have made the difference between safety and tragedy. When warning signs exist but are not seen, when safeguards are optional rather than embedded, and when responsibility is fragmented across an overstretched system, the consequences, as we've heard, can be fatal. So I support my honourable friend's call for change. The Liberal Democrats want to ensure that firearms licensing in this country protects public safety while remaining fair, workable and, most importantly, proportionate for those who hold licences responsibly and lawfully. I want to begin by acknowledging the unimaginable loss suffered by the family and friends of Emma and Letty Patterson. It should not take such tragedy for us to act, but we owe it to them and to the public to learn the lessons and make the changes needed that will prevent further harm. The inquest into their deaths found that George Patterson was legally permitted to hold a shotgun licence, despite having concealed relevant medical information. He had obtained significant quantities of medication for anxiety through online services entirely outside of his GP's knowledge. And when he renewed his licence, there was no effective mechanism to identify that risk. The senior coroner issued a clear warning. Unless gun ownership laws are tightened, the risk of future deaths will remain. That warning must be taken seriously. Mandatory medical markers for firearm licence holders are a proportionate and evidence-based safeguard. They're not about punishing responsible gun owners. They are about ensuring that when someone's health changes in a way that may affect their suitability to possess a firearm, that risk is identified early, rather than years later at the licence renewal, or not at all. It is effectively, as the Honourable Gentleman outlined, an ongoing safety check against changes in a person's and individual circumstances. The legal framework already recognises the importance of medical fitness. Under the Firearms Act of 1968, police must be satisfied that a person can possess a firearm without danger to public safety or the peace. Medical information is already part of that assessment. But the question before us is whether the system is robust enough. In 2022, an important step forward was taken when GPs in England were given access to interactive medical markers that can be placed on medical records for firearm certificate holders. Making these markers mandatory would help better identify individuals whose medical conditions may temporarily or permanently impair their ability to handle a firearm safely. Current guidance includes PTSD, suicidal thoughts, self-harm or harm to others, depression or anxiety, dementia, mania, bipolar disorders or psychotic illness, and neurological conditions such as alcohol or drug abuse. When assessed, that marker alerts the GP that a patient holds a firearm licence and allows concerns to be flagged to the police where appropriate. This system works. It respects professional boundaries. GPs do not decide who holds a licence. That remains rightly with law enforcement. It imposes no financial burden on surgeries, and it enables safeguards throughout the life of a licence, not just at the point of renewal. But there are flaws in this system. Its use is voluntary. It may not account for online workarounds which people are adept at using, and there's no obligation on GPs to apply the marker. That's because the previous government, the Home Office, declined to make it mandatory. We do not even know, as has been outlined, how many practices actually use it. The evidence strongly supports change. The police support mandatory markers. The Countryside Alliance supports mandatory markers. The British Association of Shooting and Conservation supports them and has suggested they be incorporated into GP contracts. The British Medical Association now recommends their use. And perhaps most compelling of all, firearms certificate holders themselves support it. 70% according to a survey by the Association of Police and Crime Commissioners. And as outlined amongst the wider public, that support is at 86%. This is a sensible proposal enjoying widespread support amongst the public and the sector. In 2016, Christopher Foster killed his wife and daughter before taking his own life. He had discussed depression and suicidal thoughts with his GP, but there was no way for the GP to know he owned firearms. In Plymouth in 2021, 6 people were killed with a licensed firearm. The inquest found that a marker had not been placed despite the police requesting one. Thankfully, in the UK, murders, suicide and deliberate injuries by licensed firearm owners remains mercifully low. The reality is that the overwhelming majority of licensed gun owners in this country are responsible gun owners. But there is no ignoring the fact that lives could have been saved in these cases had medical markers been mandatory. Medical markers are about early intervention. They protect the licence holder as much as anyone else. They ensure that when someone is struggling with their mental or physical health, support and safeguarding go hand in hand. Having safeguards in place is important because of the wider issues at play. The process for approving or refusing firearm licence is currently slow, inconsistent, expensive, and in large parts of the country under huge strain. Processing time varies wildly depending on where you live in the UK. Fees differ. Huge backlogs exist in some places. Firearm licensing is a specialist function delivered by local police forces, yet rural police forces, like mine in Dorset, responsible for areas with high levels of gun ownership, are the ones under the greatest financial pressure and struggling with overstretched resources. Firearms in farming communities are not recreational. For most farmers, they are an essential tool of their trade. When renewals are delayed, livelihoods are affected. There are further challenges. The Home Office is consulting on merging Section 1 and 2 licensing. This may be well-intentioned, but it risks adding complexity, cost and delay to an already fragile system unless carefully handled. Licensing is already expensive. Delays already undermine confidence. It is why I believe that we must look seriously at proposals for a dedicated firearms licensing agency. The government's own recent white paper acknowledges that firearms are a specialist area and that concentrating such functions in centres of excellence could improve effectiveness, consistency and value for money. A centralised body could standardise fees, reduce waiting times, ensure consistent application of medical markers and take the pressure off local police forces, freeing them to focus on their job, frontline policing. A specialist agency would be better equipped to process licences efficiency, applying safeguards properly and responding to risks swiftly. It would also ensure that reforms like mandatory medical markers are implemented consistently and effectively rather than, as it is at the moment, unevenly across the country. The Liberal Democrats are proud champions of rural communities. We support responsible gun ownership. We are also clear that safeguarding must go hand in hand with support. We will always stand up for people experiencing mental ill health or addiction. That is precisely why early identification and intervention matters. Mandatory medical markers are not about punishment, they are about protection. And at a time when mental health services are under immense strain, when online medical services can be used to bypass safeguards, it's more important than ever that our licensing system is joined up, informed and proactive. So I ask the Minister, will he please release the data my honourable friend has requested? Will he please give consideration to a centralised licensing system and making mandatory markers mandatory, and will they ensure that public safety measures are not undermined by a system that is slow, inconsistent and overstretched?
Gregory Stafford.
Thank you very much, Mrs McVeigh. It is a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship today, and it is a pleasure for me to be here, as I usually respond to things in the Health Department, to hear a more rural point. But representing Farnham and Bourne, which is a semi-rural seat, it would be of no surprise to members in the House that I need to declare that I am a supporter of the Countryside Alliance and a member of the Conservative Rural Forum. I also want to thank the Honourable Member for Epsom and Ewell for securing this debate today and for her many expositions of very, very tragic cases, especially her powerful remarks about the appalling case of Emma and Letty Patterson. I want to thank my honourable friend for North Cotswolds for his very practical approach to this debate, and a number of the issues that he raises I think the government should take on board. Likewise, my honourable friend for Wyre Forest, discussing the synergies between gun licences and other licensing regimes, in his case a pilot. I look forward to him taking me on a trip at some point. And also to the honourable member for Tiverton and Minehead for her, as ever, interesting contributions with her rural experience. Whenever we decide to create new rules which restrict the behaviour of the many in response to the actions of the few, we must be extremely careful. Where genuine loopholes exist because of data silos or because of how long-standing rules interact with novel cases, then it is right that they are closed. Now, as has been mentioned, while the firearms marker is not mandatory, a digital version has been rolled out to all general practices in England, with implementation completed in May of 2023. Now, the key point that the honourable member for Epsom and Ewell mentioned was that the government must continue to monitor the efficacy of that current system to ensure that only those who are suitable are able to hold a fire alarm licence, and more especially to publish the data surrounding that. Now, as has been mentioned, many organisations are supportive of mandatory markers, and I have a lot of sympathy from that, but we must have that data to make an evidence-led approach to this. Protecting the integrity of the firearms licensing system is essential for public safety, but any measures must remain proportionate and avoid placing unnecessary burdens on medical professionals or responsible licence holders. As we've seen so often in recent years, the net result of successive, well-intentioned changes to the law can be a system which makes life unduly difficult for the vast majority of law-abiding people, while failing to actually stop the criminal minority. Now, unfortunately, Madam Chairman, under this government we have seen a renewed assault on civilian firearm ownership, which is set to directly punish those in rural communities who rely on firearms as tools of the trade. For farmers, land managers and pest controllers, firearms are part and parcel of everyday life, and access to these tools is vital. Without them, it would be impossible to protect livestock and to manage the local population of certain animals, as farming communities have done for centuries. Yet, without any particular justification, and without ever proving that it would actually prevent criminals from getting hold of firearms, this government has announced that it plans to regulate Section 2 firearms, like shotguns, under the more stringent regime previously applied only to Section 1 firearms. We've heard vague gestures in the direction of public safety, yet no clear case has been made for the substantive measures proposed, and we've certainly had no indication from the government that it has considered the particular needs of rural communities. If shotguns are to be regulated like long-range rifles, how does the government expect farmers and pest controllers to continue their work? And given that many police firearms licensing departments, as we have heard, are overwhelmed by the volume of applications in the area, has there been any consideration of the delays that extra work for these departments would create? Madam Chairman, one of my constituents recently submitted a renewal application within the timeframe recommended by the police, allowing more than 6 months for processing. The only response received was, by return of post, an extension of the existing licence, as the department acknowledged that it would be unable to issue a new licence within the 6-month period. The routine of use of licence extensions is concerning because it allows firearms to remain in circulation without a timely, full reassessment of suitability. Yet some of the proposals the government is going to do won't help with public safety, but will put additional burdens on the police force and will make that more likely. So has... Yes, of course.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Throughout this debate, we've talked about proportionality. And I think everybody who has spoken has agreed that compulsory medical markers would be totally proportionate to try and make the public safer. But the proposal to move shotguns from Section 2 to Section 1 is totally disproportionate. The current law was framed as it is because a shotgun is only lethal at a relatively short range, whereas a firearm, even the 2.2, if it's shot straight, is lethal at up to a mile with high-velocity bullets. They are two totally different tools of the trade used for different uses.
I thank my honourable friend for that intervention. He is entirely right. It seems to me that the government is taking a knee-jerk reaction without understanding both the logistics and the mechanics and of the differences between long-range rifles and shotguns used by our rural communities, and, as my honourable friend says from a sedentary position, actually see the evidence for it. And whether we're talking about medical markers or the changes to the shotgun licensing regime, the key thing is it must be done with evidence. So I ask the Minister, therefore, has there been any consideration of the disruption that these delays would cause for those in rural communities who rely on firearms for work? Have these questions been asked at all within the Home Office? Or, like so many others, has this government simply failed to consider the needs of rural communities? It is clearly true that, wherever possible, our firearms licensing rules should prevent weapons from falling into the hands of those who only wish to use them to do harm to others. But any new changes to the law must account for the fact that life in the countryside is very different to life in our largest cities. We must afford some space for discretion and for the recognition of the particular needs of certain communities. We must also be sure, always, that new rules would actually make life more difficult for wrongdoers instead of allowing good intentions to lead us into making life more difficult for the law-abiding majority. Far too often, it's the law-abiding who are punished by rules created in this place, even when those rules were designed with the most sincere intention of targeting the criminal few. So, can the Minister provide clarity on when we can expect the consultation on proposed changes to shotgun licensing, and can he assure us today that the final verdict of this consultation will take full account of those across rural Britain whose livelihoods would be rendered impossible by these proposals? And can he further assure us that before considering any new regulations, this government will first consider a renewed focus on enforcing the law as it already stands? Madam Chairman, I think there's been clear agreement in this debate for the need for a licensing system that protects the public, doesn't overburden the police or the NHS, stops and punishes wrongdoers, and recognises the special need that rural communities have for responsible gun ownership. Therefore, I urge the Minister to approach this from an evidence-based, proportionate and fair attitude, protecting the public and protecting our rural way of life.
Minister.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, Ms McVeigh. And let me begin by thanking the honourable member for Epsom and Ewell for securing this debate, and to all members for their well-argued, compelling, considered and sensible points. I will address these as best I can in my response and move on to the shotgun issue nearer to the end of the response. Firearms licensing controls are crucial, as we know, to minimise the risk of harm and keep the public safe. Medical checks and the use of firearms markers are an important part of these controls. While I understand why there are calls for the marker to be mandatory, the government does not consider this to be necessary at this point, and I will come on to reasons why. It should be recognised that the decisions in all firearm application cases are taken by relevant police forces. Medical information provided by GPs is very important, but it's just one part of the information considered by police. Before I address the specific points that have been raised during the debate, I want to reassure members and their constituents that work continues to make the firearms licensing system as robust as it can be. While public safety is and will always be the priority, it's also right to acknowledge that the large majority of firearms licence holders do not cause any concern, and there are some here today. The challenge is to have an effective system in place to identify individuals who might cause harm. Of course, the tragedy at Epsom College in February 2023 shocked us all. And in discussing these issues, I know we all have the victims of this crime and others well and truly in the forefront of our minds, of course, including Emma Patterson and her 7-year-old daughter, Letty. The perpetrator was Emma's husband, and he was a licensed shotgun owner who then killed himself. He had suffered anxiety, but his GP and the police were unaware of this because he had sought treatment from an online doctor, as explained earlier, and not disclosed this when he applied for his certificate renewal. The medical checks for firearms licensing have been significantly strengthened over recent years. Medical information for firearms licensing has been a requirement for every firearm and shotgun licence application since November 2021, when the new guidance for chief officers of police and firearms licensing was introduced. The applicant's doctor must now provide details of any relevant medical conditions such as depression, dementia, mental health issues, drug or alcohol abuse that are experienced by the applicant. A firearms licence will not be granted without this information. On firearms markers, a digital firearms marker is placed on the GP patient record when a certificate is granted. This means that if a holder has a relevant medical condition over the 5 years validity of the certificate, the GP can alert the police, who will then review whether the person is still suitable to have a firearms licence and then revoke the licence if necessary. Initially, this marker was in the form of a paper marker on a person's medical record, but because of concerns that this could be easily overlooked by a busy GP, work has been done to replace the paper marker with a new digital firearms marker. Use of the digital firearms marker is not a core health requirement for GPs and is not a part of the GP contract, nor is it a legal requirement. But the British Medical Association and the Royal College of GPs support its use, and the BMA issues guidance to GPs about the firearms markers. Any GP who fails to engage with the process would therefore be going against the advice of their professional associations, as well as taking a significant risk. The data we have available indicates that most GPs are applying the digital firearms markers in England, as they are expected to do. We have received very encouraging data from NHS England about how the marker is being used by doctors, and we are continuing to work with NHS England and the Department of Health so that we can assess whether there are any regional variations which could signpost whether greater engagement between police and doctors at a local level is needed in certain areas. So the data provided by NHS England for the last 3 years does show figures for the number of active digital firearms markers applied by GP surgeries in each year, and I will go through that data with you now before the honourable member intervenes and asks for the data. If there are any gaps in this data, please do intervene at the end. I will take note and we can, of course, write back. In 2022-2023, 93,700 new digital markers were applied. In 23-24, 85,650 new markers were applied. And in the latest year available, 24-25, there were 98,690 new digital markers applied to medical records. Now, these are broadly the numbers we would expect to see when compared with the data for the number of firearm licence applications and renewals made each year. We also have data on the number of cases where the GP has notified the police of a medical concern about a certificate holder, following a review prompted by the digital marker, and that data is as follows. In 22-23, 1,180 cases were referred by GPs to police forces as a result of the digital marker. In 23-24, it was 1,040. In 24-25, it was 1,140. So this data, again, is broadly where we would expect it to be when compared to the annual figures of revocations of licences by police forces, and gives us confidence that GPs are using the digital firearms markers as it is designed to work.
I'm very grateful to the Minister for giving way. I am sad to hear that he's not following the logic of making digital markers compulsory. Because without making it compulsory, the system is weak. And therefore, public safety, as we've heard from many tragic, or a few tragic cases today. Now, I've just done a quick Google, which tells me that there are about 38,000 fully qualified GPs, or the range is 38,000 to 39,000. I think the Minister has sort of said the figures of GPs using these medical markers is around 18,000. I think that's what he said. That means that 20,000 GPs are not using them. Therefore, the system isn't anything like as effective as it should be, particularly the point that I made that by introducing this system, there would be a check between grant and renewal of shotgun and firearm licences.
Thank the right honourable member for his comments. On the data that you provided there from your quick Google, I can't comment directly on that. They may be qualified but may not be practising, so I wouldn't want to jump to any conclusions, but that can certainly be taken away. On mandating, it is presently the government's position that it is not necessary to make use of the firearms digital marker and making it mandatory. If there was compelling evidence of systemic failure by GPs to engage with the digital marker, then the case for mandatory requirement would be stronger. But that is not the picture painted by the available data. In fact, it shows the digital marker is already being applied and used by most GPs.
I'm listening with intensity to what the Minister is saying, but if he is saying that actually what we are seeing is that the number of people that are being referred to the GP with potential conditions is what they would expect, and indeed the number of markers that are there are what he would expect as well, then I can't really understand what difference it would make if it was mandatory, because it seems as though it's sort of already happening anyway, and so mandatory would just make it mandatory, and if we're saying there's no additional cost to it, then I'm sort of struggling to understand why it's difficult to change the position, Minister.
Thank you. And we need to bear in mind that the governing bodies are who oversee these GPs are, of course, against this, and the potential for that liability for a GP to potentially fail to disclose something to the police. We will, of course, and I assure you of this, keep our approach in the Home Office under review, as we do with all aspects of firearms licensing control, but we do believe the data available at this time shows that mandating is not necessary and that the digital markers quite simply are being applied and used by most GPs. There are compelling arguments. Give way.
Edward Murray.
Thank the Minister for giving way, and without wishing to labour a point, I think accepting that the data may in fact show that you're getting the level of penetration that you'd expect to get, there is undoubtedly an unquantifiable risk going forward that another tragedy happens. Given the level of uptake on a mandatory system, given the requests of the sector, and in fact the BMA as well, that's been mandatory, it seems to me purely from a perspective of de-risking it for the government, it would be a logical and relatively simple thing to do, so that when we return, inevitably at some point in the next 3 to 5 years, to talk about another tragic death, it isn't laid at the feet of this government, following on from the mistake of the previous government of not making it mandatory.
Thank the honourable gentleman for his very well made point. And at this point, what I will say is that this is, of course, being kept under review. This debate here today is important and will, of course, be listened to by the Home Office. But as it stands, our position is that the evidence is showing to us that GPs are using it as we'd expect them to. I'm conscious of time, Madam Chair, so I'm going to move on now to the points made on shotguns so that I don't miss that, because the honourable gentleman will want to hear back on this, I'm sure. We do know that shotguns are used for a range of legitimate purposes, such as target shooting and hunting. The vast majority are used safely and responsibly, and we also recognise that shooting contributes to the very important rural economy. But it is the case that legally held shotguns have been used in a number of homicides and other serious incidents in recent years, including fatal shootings in Plymouth in August 2021. So this is why we've committed to having a public consultation on strengthening the licensing controls on shotguns to bring them more into line with stringent controls on other firearms in the interests of public safety. And we will publish the consultation shortly. I do not have the exact date for you today. I can tell you shortly. We will carefully consider all of the views put forward in response to the consultation, of course, before taking any decisions on whether and what changes may be necessary in the interests of public safety. I will give way.
I thank the honourable member for giving way, and I don't want to prolong this debate, but I do want to impress upon him, when he spoke about the uses of shotguns, he talked about target shooting and hunting. I would just like to gently say to him that it is far more than for sport that these firearms are needed. They are for land management and for farming. And I encourage him, if he hasn't already, to go and meet with the organisations that represent rural communities to understand how vital shotguns are for rural land management.
Minister. Thank the honourable member for his points. I think that was covered in rural economy, because I think the maintenance of land and pest control, for example, feeds into that rural economy, but I do take the point. We will also provide an assessment of the impact of any changes we intend to bring forward, including to policing, certificate holders and rural communities at the relevant time. So in closing, I offer thanks to all members who have contributed to what has been a thought-provoking debate, and I mean that, on the issue which is central to public safety, and I'm grateful for all contributions. We do have strong firearms licensing controls, and we are taking action to improve them further where the evidence shows that this is necessary. And as I've said, we do not believe at this point that there is a compelling case for making the digital firearms marker mandatory. However, it is very important that all aspects of firearm controls are effective and strong, and as strong as possible, and our controls are kept under constant review. I'm conscious of time, but I will give way to number 2.
I can assure you, the Minister and the Chair, this will be the last time. What is the equivalence of not making medical markers mandatory, which would not cost anything, and yet going ahead with this consultation, moving shotguns from Section 2 to Section 1, which will cost the industry a significant amount of money? The shooting community is all in favour of medical markers being compulsory, but it is opposed to moving shotguns to Section 2 to Section 1. So the actions seem to be are designed to make the shooting community very discontent with these changes.
Thank the right honourable member. This is about evidence, and the evidence that I have presented today to the room suggests that GPs are abiding by the digital markers, and the evidence that shotguns have been used in violent crime also exists. But of course, as I laid out, this will go to consultation. And I'll finalise by saying that the government is committed to public safety, of course, and we remain open to any steps that could aid us in that effort.
Helen Maguire to wind up.
Thank you. I am disappointed that the Minister won't be considering GP markers as mandatory, and I do hope that he may go away and reconsider, particularly as many have alluded to, because there'll be no additional cost. There is indeed a lot of consensus here. It's common sense, it's for public safety, and as my honourable friend said, there's a win-win. I thank the honourable member for North Cotswold for his personal insight and his continual campaigning on this, for the member for Tiverton and Minehead for the valuable points she raised about the rural community, and as my honourable friend for North Dorset said, there's evidence, Northwest, sorry, that there is evidence, the police agree with this, the Countryside Alliance, the BMA, police and crime commissioners, firearm certificate holders as well. And I do not want to be here again talking about another incident, and I truly hope the Minister will go away and really consider this. Thank you.
The question is that this House has considered the potential merits of mandatory medical markers for firearm licence holders. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it, the ayes have it. Order, order, the sitting stands adjourned.